I pressed my blood-slicked hands against Gavin's chest, feeling the terrifyingly slow beat of his heart beneath my palms. The Alpha King's son, the mighty heir who had wept oceans, now lay broken and still because of me. Peter's triumphant roar echoed from the forest edge, but all I could hear was the ragged sound of my own breathing. I had done the thing no wolfless omega should ever be able to do. I had torn the moon's blessing from another. The power, foreign and violent, crackled under my skin like lightning. What have I become? But I'm getting ahead of myself. It didn't start with blood, it started with the weeping. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe and like to follow Maria's journey. The weeping was a sound that carved into the bone. It wasn't the soft cry of a child or the grieving sob of a loss. This was a raw, guttural, endless torrent of anguish that poured from the Alpha's mansion and seeped into every crack of our pack village. It had been going on for 3 days. 3 days since the former Alpha King's funeral. 3 days since his son, Gavin, had locked himself in the ancestral house and simply shattered. I kept my head down, the rough weave of my basket scraping against my palm as I hurried through the market square. The sound was worse here in the open where it had room to swell. It made my teeth ache. Disgraceful, a woman hissed from the stall to my left. Kiara, her voice was like polished silver, smooth and meant to cut. An alpha heir wailing like a sick pup. The pack needs strength, not this noise. I didn't look at her. As a wolfless omega, my opinion was less than dirt. My role was to be silent, useful, and invisible. My name is Maria, and I have perfected all 3. Peter says it's a test of loyalty, Kiara went on, speaking to her companion. To see who breaks under the strain of an alpha's grief. Peter wouldn't weep, he's already acting like the alpha we need. Peter. The head of the pack guard, all coiled ambition and sharp smiles. The weeping seemed to fuel him, a discordant melody to which he was planning his rise. I moved to the baker's stall, using the last of my tokens for a loaf of day-old bread. Old man Bradley met my eyes for a fraction of a second, his wrinkled face pinched with something that wasn't pity but shared exhaustion. He shoved the loaf in my basket and with a movement so swift no one else saw, added a small apple. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The weeping wore on everyone. A sudden shift in the air made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. The market chatter died. The weeping from the mansion didn't stop, but it was no longer the only focus. Gavin stood at the top of the stone steps leading to the mansion's great doors. He was a silhouette against the heavy oak, tall and broad-shouldered, but hunched in on himself as if carrying the weight of the sky. Even from this distance, I could see the tremors that racked him. He was shirtless, wearing only loose trousers, and his skin was pale against the dark wood. His chest heaved with another ragged, soul-deep sob that echoed over the silent square. No one moved, no one breathed. We were a frozen tableau of shame and voyeurism. Then his head lifted. His eyes, red-rimmed and blazing with a pain so acute it felt like a physical blow, scanned the crowd. They passed over Kiara's disdainful stare, over the guards who shifted uncomfortably, over the bowed heads of the Omegas. They landed on me. It wasn't a choice. My head was already bowed, but I felt it, a searing, magnetic pull that forced my gaze up to meet his. His eyes weren't the cold, commanding gold of an alpha in power. They were a stormy, turbulent hazel, awash in tears but terrifyingly, utterly present. In them, I didn't see a future king. I saw a drowning man, and he was looking directly at me. A jolt, like static shock, went through my core, my breath hitched. It was the most attention any alpha had ever paid me, and it felt like being stripped bare. He wasn't seeing the wolfless omega, the invisible girl. He was seeing me, Maria, and the sheer unexpectedness of it was paralyzing. His lips moved. No sound came out over the distance and his own choked breaths, but I read the shape of the word. You, Before I could process it, before I could even think to look away, the mansion doors burst open behind him. Peter strode out, his expression a mask of concerned authority. He placed a firm hand on Gavin's bare shoulder, a gesture meant to look supportive, but that pinned him in place. "Enough, Gavin," Peter's voice rang out, too loud, too performative. "The pack needs you to be strong, this ends now." He began to pull Gavin back inside, his grip unmistakably forceful. Gavin resisted, his eyes still locked on mine for one more second. A silent, desperate plea that twisted something inside me I didn't know existed. Then Peter yanked him violently, and the heavy oak doors slammed shut with a finality that shook the very stones under my feet. The weeping continued, now muffled by thick walls. The market square erupted in nervous whispers. Kiara's laugh was a sharp, triumphant sound. "See, Peter has the situation in hand. He'll drag us back to order by force if necessary." I stood rooted to the spot, the impression of Gavin's stormy eyes burned into my vision. That single silent word, "You, why me?" Old man Bradley leaned over his stall, his voice a low grumble meant only for me. "Got a delivery for the mansion kitchens. Gardener's sick, they need the herb baskets." "You know the way," I blinked, finally tearing my gaze from the closed doors. "Me, but the mansion, Omegas like me didn't deliver. We left goods at the service gate. They're short-handed, the noise has everyone on edge." He shoved 2 large wicker baskets filled with rosemary, thyme, and lavender into my arms. The scent was overwhelming. "Side kitchen door, go now." It wasn't a request. It was an order wrapped in an opportunity, and maybe a tiny, reckless part of me whispered it was a chance to understand that drowning look. My heart hammered against my ribs as I took the baskets and slipped away from the square, taking the back path through the kitchen gardens. The weeping grew louder again as I approached the servants' entrance, a relentless, sonic wave of despair. I slipped inside the dim, stone-flagged kitchen. It was empty, a half-peeled potato abandoned on a chopping block. The sound was all-consuming here, vibrating in the copper pots hanging from the walls. It was directionless, coming from everywhere and nowhere. I set the baskets down quietly, my task complete. I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me to flee this house of profound, unstable grief, but I didn't. I moved deeper into the mansion, drawn by a thread of foolish curiosity. The corridors were dark, the air thick with the scent of old wood and salt tears. The sobs guided me, a terrible beacon. I found a narrow servant's staircase and climbed, the sound pulling me upward. I emerged onto a shadowy gallery that overlooked the grand hall. Below, the vast room was empty save for 2 figures. Peter stood near the cold fireplace, arms crossed, watching with an expression of cold impatience. And Gavin knelt in the center of the room on the stone floor before his father's empty throne. His back was to me, his shoulders shaking violently with each wrenching sob. The sound was unbearable up close, a physical pressure in my skull. "You have to stop this, Gavin," Peter said, his voice echoing. "Your weakness is a stench in the pack's nostrils. You are not fit to lead. Step aside, make the announcement, do it with some dignity." Gavin didn't answer. He just wept, his hands fisted in his hair. Peter's lip curled. "You're pathetic, your father would be ashamed." Something snapped in the air. Gavin's weeping didn't stop, but his head lifted slightly. His voice, when it came, was shredded, barely audible, but laced with a core of steel I hadn't expected. "Get out," Peter scoffed. "Or what? You'll cry at me? Get out!" Gavin roared, the command laced with a thread of raw, untamed alpha power that made the windows rattle. Even Peter flinched. With a final, disgusted look, Peter turned and strode from the hall, his boots clicking on the stone. Silence descended, broken only by Gavin's ragged breaths. He was alone, drowning, and I was a ghost in the gallery, witnessing it all. I should have slipped away, I meant to, But as I took a step back, the old floorboard beneath my foot let out a sharp, betraying creak. Gavin's head whipped around, his tear-streaked face tilted up, and his eyes, those stormy, drowning eyes, found me in the shadows. There was no surprise in them this time, only a deep, weary recognition. He didn't shout. He didn't demand to know what I was doing there, he just stared, his chest heaving. Then he did the unimaginable. The mighty Alpha heir, the son of a king, looked straight at the wolfless Omega hiding in the dark, and in a voice broken by 3 days of sorrow, he whispered, "Help me!" The word hung in the air between us, a fragile, impossible thing. And I had no idea what to do. His words hung in the air between us, a plea that made the world tilt. Help me! The Alpha heir had asked a wolfless Omega for help. In the suffocating silence of the grand hall, with Peter's furious gaze burning into my back, I could only stare at Gavin's tear-streaked, desperate face. Peter recovered first. A low, incredulous growl rumbled from his chest. "Have you lost your mind completely? Look at her, Gavin. She's nothing, a ghost. She can't even shift." He took a menacing step toward me, his dominance pressing down like a physical weight, forcing my gaze to the floor. "Get out, this doesn't concern scullery maids." But Gavin moved. It was a shaky, unsteady motion, but he placed himself slightly between Peter and me. He didn't touch me, didn't even look at me again, but the gesture was unmistakable. "It concerns whoever I say it concerns," Gavin said, his voice raw but suddenly devoid of tears. It was the first thread of alpha command I'd ever heard from him, thin and frayed but present. "Leave her be." Peter's eyes narrowed. He assessed Gavin, then me, with the cold calculation of a predator. A nasty smile touched his lips. "Fine, keep your pet ghost. It only proves my point. You're unfit. The pack sees it. They hear you weeping like a pup while our borders grow soft. I'll give you until the moon reaches its zenith tonight. Appear before the pack in the square. Show them a leader." He didn't wait for an answer. With a final, contemptuous glance that swept over both of us, he turned and strode from the hall, his boots echoing a final judgment. The silence he left behind was even heavier. I could hear Gavin's ragged breathing. I kept my eyes fixed on the intricate pattern of the stone floor, my body screaming at me to flee, to return to the safe, predictable oblivion of my chores. "Look at me?" His voice was quiet now, exhausted. Slowly, I raised my head. He looked worse up close. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, his skin pale. The magnificent heir was a shell propped up by sheer, bewildering will. "You're Maria," he stated. He knew my name. The shock of it stole my breath. I managed a stiff nod, my throat locked. "Why did you come here?" It took me 3 tries to find my voice, a thin, reedy thing. "The baker, old man Bradley, he had a delivery for the house." Gavin's gaze drifted to the forgotten basket I still clutched in my white-knuckled hand. He let out a sound that was almost a laugh but utterly joyless. "Bread, while my world ends, the bread must still arrive." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Did you hear what he said?" "Yes, Alpha." "Don't call me that," he snapped, then immediately winced as if the outburst pained him. "Not you, not right now. He's right, you know, about all of it. I can feel it, the pack bond. It's thin, fraying, they're scared, and I'm just here. Drowning." I didn't know what to say. Comfort was not a tool Omegas were allowed to wield, especially not for Alphas. We were meant to absorb distress, not address it, so I stood, silent and useless. "He looked at you," Gavin murmured, more to himself than to me. "In the square 3 days ago, when I fell apart, I saw him, Peter. He looked at you and then at me, and his disgust wasn't just for my tears. It was because I was looking at you, an Omega, a wolfless one." His eyes focused on me again, intense and searching. Why did I look at you?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't know. Neither do I." He took a step closer, and I fought the instinct to retreat. He didn't smell like a dominant alpha, all aggression and power. He smelled of salt, of deep earth, of a crushing, profound sorrow. But when I saw you just now hiding in the shadows, it was the only clear thought I've had in days. Ask her for help." "I have no help to give," I whispered, the truth a bitter ash on my tongue. "I have no wolf, I have no strength, I am nothing," as he said. "You have eyes no one else bothers to use," he said, startling me. "You move through this pack like a whisper, you see and hear things, you were in the square, you're here now, you witnessed that." He gestured to the space where Peter had stood. "You are the only person in this pack who has seen my humiliation, who is not invested, who doesn't want something from me or from my title." It was a terrifying insight. He saw my invisibility not as a deficiency but as a vantage point. "What do you want me to do?" The question left me before I could stop it. "Stay," the single word hung in the air. "Just stay in the house, not as a servant, as a presence. Peter's wolves watch my every move, report my every sigh. They are waiting for me to break completely. He struggled, searching for the concept. "I need a witness who is mine, someone who isn't counting the cracks in my armor to exploit them." It was madness, an Omega living in the Alpha's mansion, not to serve but to observe, to be a companion. The scandal would be immense, the danger for me would be lethal. "They will kill me," I said flatly. "I won't let them." The thread of command was back, stronger now. It was undercut by the tremor in his hands, but the intent was there. "You will have my protection. It may be the only thing I have left to give, but I will give it. Please, Maria." He said my name again, and it sounded like a lifeline. He was the drowning man, and he was asking me, a stone, to anchor him. A stone could only sink him faster. But his eyes, they held none of Peter's calculation, none of Kiara's disdain. Only a lost, bewildered hope. I thought of old man Bradley's extra apple, his sad eyes, a small, quiet kindness in a world turning cruel. This was not quiet. This was a cataclysm, but the man before me was breaking, and he had asked me to see him. I nodded once. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was painful to witness. He swayed on his feet. "Thank you." He turned, looking toward the large, ornate chair, the throne at the head of the hall. He didn't approach it. "There are rooms in the east wing, empty, pick one. Tell the house steward I commanded it. He is still loyal to my father's memory, he won't question it openly." "And the moon's zenith?" I asked. "What will you do?" A shadow of the paralyzing grief returned to his features. "I don't know, I have to face them, I have to try." He looked at me, and in that moment he seemed younger than me despite his years and stature. "Will you be there, in the square, if you command it?" "I'm not commanding, I'm asking," I swallowed. "Then I will be there." He gave another of those brittle, near laughs. "Good, at least one person in the crowd won't be wishing for my failure." Leaving the grand hall felt like stepping out of a dream and into a storm. The house steward, a tall, severe man named Elias, stared at me as if I'd grown a second head when I delivered Gavin's instruction. His nostrils flared, scenting my Omega status, my lack of wolf, my sheer insignificance. Disapproval radiated from him, but the ingrained loyalty to the Alpha line held. Without a word, he led me to the east wing, to a small, clean room usually reserved for low-ranking guest attendants. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking a walled garden. It was a palace compared to the Omega dormitory. "You will take your meals here," Elias said, his voice icy. "You will not wander, you will not approach the Alpha heir unless summoned. Do you understand?" I nodded, my eyes downcast. The rules were a familiar cage, even in this new prison. I didn't unpack the meager bag I'd fetched from the dormitory. I simply sat on the bed, listening to the strange silence of the mansion. It was a silence full of tension, of whispers in distant corridors, of the oppressive weight of Gavin's grief somewhere above me. As dusk began to fall, the atmosphere in the house changed. I heard more footsteps, hushed, urgent voices. The pack was gathering in the square. I slipped from my room and, using the skills of a lifetime of invisibility, made my way to a side entrance. No one stopped me. To them, I was just another shadow. The market square was packed. Torches flickered, casting shifting light on hundreds of anxious, expectant faces. The air buzzed with tension and a low, collective murmur. I found a spot at the very back near the mouth of an alley where the shadows were deep. Peter and his guards were already there, forming a grim, imposing semicircle before the empty steps of the meeting dais. Kiara stood just behind Peter's shoulder, her expression one of poised anticipation. The pack's attention was fixed on the path leading from the mansion. When Gavin appeared, a ripple went through the crowd. He walked alone. He had cleaned up, changed into a dark, simple tunic and trousers, but nothing could disguise the gauntness of his face, the deep bruises under his eyes. He walked slowly, each step seeming to cost him. But he held his head up, his gaze scanning the crowd. I saw the moment his eyes passed over my dark corner. He didn't stop, didn't nod, but I felt a faint, inexplicable sense of recognition. He climbed the steps and turned to face his pack. The murmuring died. For a long moment he just stood there, swallowing hard, his hands clenched at his sides. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. I saw Peter shift his weight, a smirk playing on his lips. This was the failure he was waiting for. Then Gavin spoke. "My father is dead." His voice carried, quieter than an alpha's should be, but clear. It wasn't the powerful boom of his father, but it held. The pain of that, it is a hole in the world. I know you feel it too. I have been in that hole. A few uncomfortable shuffles in the crowd. Kiara rolled her eyes. I have heard the talk, Gavin continued, his voice gaining a sliver of strength, that my grief is weakness, that our enemies smell blood, that we need strength now, not tears. He looked directly at Peter. You are not wrong, a surprised murmur. Peter's smirk faded, replaced by wary confusion. Strength is needed, Gavin said, and now he looked out over the pack, his gaze moving across them. But what is strength? Is it the absence of feeling? My father felt deeply, for this pack, for this land, for his family. His strength came from that feeling, I am my father's son. His voice cracked on the last word and he paused, mastering himself. I will not apologize for mourning him. The dynamic in the square shifted subtly. The outright disdain softened into something more like uncertain pity. The moon's zenith is almost upon us, Gavin said, looking up at the sky where the first stars were appearing. I will not stand here and make you empty promises of power I do not yet fully possess. My wolf, it grieves with me. This was a stunning admission. An alpha never admitted to a lack of control over his beast. But I am still your alpha's son. The bloodline is not broken. The bond is not severed, it is wounded. He was offering them a role, not just demanding obedience, but asking for support. It was a radically different approach. Peter could feel the change. He stepped forward. Pretty words, Gavin. But words don't patrol borders, words don't fill bellies. The pack needs a leader who can act, not just feel. We need decisive strength. Now. And you offer yourself as that strength? Gavin asked, turning fully to him. The confrontation was now public, center stage. I offer what is necessary, Peter said, his voice booming, full of confident dominance. Several in the crowd nodded. Then let us be clear, Gavin said, and he straightened his shoulders. The lost, weeping boy was gone, replaced by a young man standing on a precipice. I am my father's heir, the line runs through me. If the pack wishes to follow you, they must reject me. Formally, before the moon, that is our law. Will you call for a casting, Peter? Will you ask them to break the blood oath? Silence, absolute dead silence. A casting was a brutal, final act. It would tear the pack in two, cause civil strife. Peter had hoped to pressure Gavin into abdicating smoothly. Gavin had just called his bluff, raising the stakes to all-out war. Peter's face darkened. He had not expected this flicker of spine. You would risk the pack's very survival on your pride. I risk it on my birthright, Gavin countered, his voice gaining a hard edge. and on my belief that this pack is more than just a muscle to be flexed. It is a family, and families grieve together. The standoff crackled in the torchlight. The pack watched breathless. It was then that a commotion erupted at the edge of the square. A young guard, one of Peter's, stumbled into the open, his face pale, a long, bleeding gash on his arm. "Captain, at the northern ridge, rogues." At least 5 of them, scenting of pine and iron, they crossed the stream. Panic instantly replaced the political tension. Rogues, violent lone wolves without a pack, often desperate and cruel. Their incursion was the tangible threat Peter had been warning about. Peter spun, his authority instantly legitimized by crisis. "You see, while we debate, they strike," he glared at Gavin. "What are your orders, Alpha?" All eyes shot to Gavin. This was the test. Theory was over. Gavin paled. I could see the calculations, the fear, the grief, all warring in his eyes. His moment of rhetorical victory evaporated in the face of real, physical danger. He opened his mouth, but no command came out. He froze. Peter's triumph was vicious and immediate. "He has none." He turned to the pack, his voice a rallying cry. "Guards, with me, to the northern ridge, drive them back, the rest of you secure the village." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. He shifted in a blur of muscle and fur, a massive gray-brown wolf, and launched himself toward the north, his loyal guards following suit, their shifts echoing like cracks of thunder. Gavin remained on the dais, a statue of failure. The pack, after a moment of stunned hesitation, began to disperse, following Peter's de facto orders, casting looks of profound disappointment and fear back at their motionless heir. Kiara shot Gavin a look of pure contempt before hurrying away. The square emptied rapidly, leaving only scattered torches and the distant sounds of alarm, and me in my dark alley. Gavin finally moved, sinking to his knees on the dais, his head in his hands. The brief flame of defiance had been utterly snuffed out. He was broken, publicly and completely. I should have slipped away, back to my little room, back to the safety of obscurity, but I didn't. I found my feet moving forward across the now deserted square, the cobbles cool under my thin shoes. I walked until I stood at the base of the dais steps. He didn't hear me approach. His shoulders were shaking, but no sound came out. The weeping was silent now, internalized and total. "Gavin." He flinched, his head snapping up. In the flickering torchlight, his face was a mask of utter devastation. Seeing me seemed to confuse him further. You stayed. You asked me to witness," I said softly. The words felt alien in my mouth. "I am witnessing." A sob finally escaped him, harsh and ragged. "You saw, I am nothing." He was right. The sight of him, this powerful creature brought so low, triggered something in me, not pity, not romance. It was a deep, resonant ache of understanding. I knew what it was to be nothing, to be less than nothing. But I had never been expected to be everything. Without thinking, driven by an impulse I could not name, I climbed the 3 steps and stood before him. I did not touch him. I simply stood there, a silent, wolfless pillar in the empty square. "They need you to lead," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But you cannot lead them from here on your knees." "How?" The word was torn from him. "How do I lead when my own wolf is a storm of sorrow inside me, when I can't think past the memory of his scent fading?" I had no answer for that. I had no wolf to guide me ever. My whole life was thinking past the emptiness where a wolf should be. Maybe that was the only insight I had. "Then don't think," I said. The heresy of it made my own skin prickle. "Just act. The rogues are at the ridge, your pack is there, your father's land is there. Go there, not to give orders, just to be there as his son. Let them see you stand on the border, even if you don't know what to do next." He stared at me, his eyes wide, as if I were speaking in a forgotten tongue. The idea was so simple, so devoid of alpha strategy, it seemed to bypass his paralysis. To stop thinking and just move. Slowly, shakily, he pushed himself to his feet. He looked toward the north, toward the sounds of distant conflict. He looked back at me, and in his eyes the lost hope was rekindling, fragile and desperate. "Come with me," he said. It was not a request this time. It was a command born of newfound, desperate purpose. And I knew with a certainty that chilled my blood that this was the point of no return. To follow him now was to step out of the shadows forever, to tie my fate, however briefly, to his crumbling destiny. I looked at his outstretched hand, not offered to help me but to pull me into the storm. I took it. His grip was firm, warm. He didn't shift. He began to run, pulling me along out of the square and onto the dark path leading north toward the sounds of snarls and the scent of blood on the wind. The cliffs of the northern ridge rose against the starry sky, and as we ran, the moon finally reached its zenith, bathing the world in cold, silver light. And from the ridge above, we heard a chorus of triumphant, alien howls, not the disciplined cries of our pack guards, but the savage, hungry cries of rogues. They were not being driven back. They were winning. The sounds of battle grew louder as we ran, snarls, the wet crunch of impact, and sharp yelps of pain that cut through the cold air. Gavin's grip on my wrist was iron, pulling me along a path only he could see in the dark, his earlier paralysis burned away by a frantic, single-minded purpose. I was just a breathless weight, my human legs screaming in protest as we climbed the rocky incline toward the northern ridge. We burst into a scene of chaos. The clearing was a nightmare of shifting shadows and violence under the partial moon. I saw Peter, shifted into a massive, slate-gray wolf, locked in a brutal grapple with a larger, mangy-looking rogue whose fur was matted with filth and blood. Other wolves, pack guards in their wolf forms, were scattered, each engaged with their own opponents. The rogues fought with a desperate, wild ferocity, all snapping jaws and reckless charges. The air reeked of pine, iron, and the coppery tang of fresh blood. Gavin skidded to a halt, releasing my wrist. For a second he just stared, his chest heaving. Then a low, guttural growl started deep in his throat. It wasn't a human sound. His body began to contort, bones cracking and reforming with sickening pops. Clothes tore as fur, a rich, dark brown, almost black in the moonlight, sprouted from his skin. In moments where the grieving heir had stood was a colossal wolf, larger even than Peter. He threw his head back and unleashed a roar that vibrated in my teeth, a sound of pure, sovereign fury that momentarily stilled the fray. Every pack wolf's ears swiveled toward him. Peter, shoving his opponent back, glanced over, his wolfish eyes wide. Gavin didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the fight, a thunderbolt of focused power. He barreled into the rogue fighting Peter, taking the creature completely by surprise. His attack wasn't wild, it was devastatingly efficient. He went for the throat. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the rough bark of a thick pine, making myself as small as possible. This was not my world. I was a ghost here, a fragile spectator in a storm of tooth and claw. I watched, my heart a trapped bird in my ribs, as Gavin's intervention turned the tide. His sheer size and the shocking authority of his presence galvanized the pack guards. With a series of coordinated snaps and flanking moves, they began to overwhelm the rogues. The largest rogue, the one Gavin had targeted, lay still. The others, seeing their leader fall, began to disengage, their desperate courage fleeing. With a few final, snapping warnings from the pack guards, they melted back into the forest, leaving behind two of their dead and the heavy scent of their retreat. Silence descended, broken only by the panting of the wolves and the moan of the wind through the pines. One by one, the pack guards began to shift back. Naked, bleeding from various gashes, they stood weary but alert. Peter shifted last. He stood, wiping blood from a cut on his brow, his eyes fixed on Gavin, who was still in his wolf form, standing over the fallen rogue. Gavin's massive head turned. His amber wolf eyes found me, pinned against the tree. He paced toward me, each step deliberate. The other warriors watched, confused glances shifting between their heir in wolf form and the wolfless Omega cowering by a tree. Gavin stopped before me, his hot breath puffing in the air. Then he shifted. It was less violent than before, a flowing contraction of muscle and bone. He stood before me naked, streaked with dirt and rogue blood, his human face stark and grim in the moonlight. He didn't seem to notice his state or the audience, he only looked at me. "You see," he said, his voice raw, "I acted." I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. Peter strode forward, grabbing a discarded cloak from one of his men and thrusting it at Gavin. "Cover yourself," he said, his voice tight. "A display is one thing, but this is indecent." His eyes flicked to me with pure venom. Gavin took the cloak and fastened it roughly around his shoulders, his gaze never leaving Peter's face. "The border is secure, for now." "You secured it," Peter conceded, though it seemed to pain him. "A timely arrival, but one fight doesn't make a ruling alpha. The pack saw you kneel, they saw you freeze. This," he gestured at the dead rogue, "proves you can fight. It doesn't prove you can lead. And leading is sending warriors to die while you watch from the square," Gavin shot back, a flicker of his old fire returning. "Leading is making the hard decision to send strength where it's needed, not crumbling under the weight of feeling everything," Peter countered, his voice rising. The guards watched this new confrontation tensely. Gavin took a step closer to Peter, and despite the cloak, he seemed to tower. "My father taught me that a leader who feels nothing for his pack is a tyrant, that a king who cannot weep for his people is a monster. I wept for my father, and in doing so I wept for every loss this pack has ever suffered. You see it as weakness. I know it as the source of my strength, it's why I'm here now." The words hung in the cold air. Some of the guards looked down, shuffled their feet. Peter's jaw worked. "Fine words," Peter spat. "We'll see what fine words count for when the next challenge comes, and it will come. Rogues don't stop after one defeat." He turned to his men. "Tend to the wounded, dispose of the bodies. Post a double watch." He gave Gavin one last long look. "You should get your witness back to the mansion. It's not safe for fragile things out here." He turned and walked away, barking orders. Gavin stood rigid, watching him go. The fierce energy that had propelled him here seemed to drain away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. He looked at me again, and the grim mask softened into something lost. "Come on," he said quietly. The return to the mansion was a silent, somber procession. Gavin walked ahead, the cloak flapping around his legs. I trailed behind, the adrenaline leaching away to leave me trembling with cold and delayed shock. We entered through a side door, avoiding the grand hall. The mansion was quiet, but it was a watchful quiet. Steward Elias materialized from a shadowy corridor, his lantern held high. His eyes took in Gavin's bloodied state, my dishevelment, and his thin lips pressed into a tighter line. "The Alpha Heir's bath has been drawn," he stated, his tone impeccably neutral, "and the guest should retire. It has been an eventful night." Gavin nodded absently. He started to walk away, then stopped. He didn't look back at me, but his voice was clear. "Elias, see that she has whatever she needs, food, warm clothes." "She stays, as you command," Elias intoned, bowing his head slightly. The disapproval radiated from him like chill from stone. Elias led me not back to the little room in the east wing, but to a slightly larger chamber closer to the heart of the mansion. It was still simple, but the blankets on the bed were thicker, and a small fire crackled in the grate. A tray of bread, cheese, and a steaming bowl of stew sat on a table. "This will be your quarters for the duration," Elias said. "You are not to wander. Your presence is tolerated on the Alpha Heir's sufferance." He left without another word. I ate mechanically, the food tasteless. The images of the fight played behind my eyes, the snapping jaws, the blood, the terrifying, majestic sight of Gavin's shift. I had told him to act, and he had saved the border. But Peter's words were a poison seed. One fight doesn't make a ruling alpha. The next days were strange, suspended in a tense limbo. I was a prisoner of privilege, confined to my room and the immediately adjacent hallway. Elias brought my meals, his silence a constant rebuke. I saw Gavin only at a distance, through doorways or across courtyards. He was constantly surrounded by older pack members whose expressions were grave, by guards giving reports. He looked exhausted, but his back was straight, his head up. The endless weeping had stopped. It had been replaced by a grim, grinding duty. I learned of pack affairs in snippets, overheard from maids who spoke in hushed tones outside my door, or from the few times Elias deigned to give a curt answer to a direct question. Peter was consolidating his control over the guard, assigning his most loyal men to key patrols. The rogue incursion was declared a probing attack and tensions were high. It was a political stalemate with the threat of violence holding the balance. 4 nights after the battle, a soft knock came at my door long after moon high. I opened it to find Gavin. He looked haunted, shadows like bruises under his eyes. He still wore the same grim determination, but it seemed stretched thin. "Walk with me," he said, his voice low. It wasn't a request. We walked through the silent, dark halls of the mansion, our footsteps echoing. He led me to a part of the house I hadn't seen, a long, enclosed gallery lined with portraits. The faces of past alphas, stern and regal, looked down upon us in the dim light of his single candle. "My father is not here yet," Gavin said, stopping before an empty space at the end of the line. "His portrait will be commissioned, they'll paint him as he was in his prime." He fell silent for a long moment, staring at the blank wall. "Peter was right, you know, about one thing, a fight doesn't make a leader. I can feel them waiting. The pack, they're waiting for me too, to become him. To become my father, but I'm not, I'm just me." He turned to me, the candlelight dancing in his eyes. "Why did you come to the ridge? You could have stayed in the mansion, you would have been safe." I looked at the stone floor. "You told me to come, and you always do what you're told." The question was sharp, probing. I met his gaze then. "No, not always." A ghost of something, not a smile, but an acknowledgement, touched his lips. "Then why?" I searched for the words, the truth I hadn't even admitted to myself. "Because no one had ever looked at me before you did. In the square, you saw me, and when you asked me to stay, you were the first person who ever asked me for anything. Not ordered, asked." My voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know what to do, so I just acted. He stared at me, and the intensity of his focus was a physical weight. "Just acted," he repeated softly. He looked back at the empty space on the wall. "They want a symbol, a strong arm, a roar. Peter can give them that." "What can I give them?" "Yourself," I heard myself say. The words felt dangerous. "They saw your father for decades. They only saw you weep, then they saw you fight. Maybe they need to see the person in between." He was very still, then he blew out the candle, plunging us into darkness save for the moonlight filtering through high windows. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice coming from the blackness beside me. "There's a gathering at the old stone circle at dusk. The pack will be there, Peter will be there. I have to address them to decide the path forward." He paused. "I want you there." "Elias won't allow it," I murmured. "An omega at a pack gathering? I am the alpha heir," Gavin said, and for the first time the title didn't sound like a burden he was rejecting, but a fact he was stating. "And I allow it. You are my witness, be there." I heard his footsteps recede, leaving me alone in the dark gallery with the painted eyes of kings. The following evening, Elias presented me with a simple, dark gray wool dress. "To be less conspicuous," he said tersely. He led me out of the mansion, not through the front, but via a winding garden path that emerged at the edge of a large, natural amphitheater, the stone circle. It was an ancient place, moss-covered monoliths forming a rough ring on a hilltop overlooking the village. The entire pack seemed to be there, hundreds of them, filling the space with a low, anxious murmur. Torches were lit, casting flickering light on serious faces. I stayed at the tree line as instructed, a shadow among shadows. I saw Peter and Kiara standing prominently near the central stone, surrounded by his corps of guards. They looked confident, anticipatory. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gavin was walking into the circle. He wore no ceremonial garb, just simple trousers and a tunic. He looked pale but calm. He walked to the central stone but did not stand on it. He stood before it, facing his people. The murmuring died, all eyes were on him. "You know why we're here," Gavin began, his voice carrying clearly in the cool air. "The challenge stands, the threat remains, and you have all seen me, my grief, my failure, my moment of strength. Peter believes the pack needs a leader unburdened by feeling. I believe a leader who feels nothing is a danger to everything we are." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "I will not fight Peter for this title in the old way. More blood, even Wolf's blood, is not what we need." A surprised murmur ran through the crowd. Peter's expression turned wary, confused. "There is another way," Gavin continued. "An older way, before castings, before formal challenges, the way of the first packs when the land itself chose the leader." He turned and pointed east toward the deepest, darkest part of the forest beyond our borders. "The Howling Caves, the place where the first wolf of our line is said to have heard the moon's command." A profound, shocked silence fell. Even Peter looked stunned, then scornful. "The caves are forbidden," Kiara called out, her voice shrill. "They are death. No one who enters has ever returned." "That is the test," Gavin said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Not strength against each other, but worthiness before the origins of our kind. I will go to the Howling Caves at the next full moon. If the pack spirit accepts me, I will return to lead. If it does not, then the path is clear for Peter or whoever the pack chooses." The crowd erupted into noise, shouts of alarm, cries of disbelief, murmurs of awe. It was madness. It was a death sentence. It was the most profoundly alpha thing I had ever heard anyone suggest. Gavin's eyes found me then, across the distance, through the torchlight and the chaos. He held my gaze for a long second, and in his eyes I didn't see a king or a weeping boy. I saw the person in between, making a choice so final it took my breath away. Peter stepped forward, his face a mask of furious calculation. He could not refuse without looking cowardly. The old ritual superseded all modern challenge. "You are a fool," Peter declared, his voice booming over the din. "But if you wish to die to spare me the trouble of a casting, I will not stop you. The pack will witness your folly." Gavin nodded, as if they had agreed on something mundane. "Then it is decided, in 3 nights' time at the full moon." He turned to leave the circle, the crowd parting before him in a mixture of terror and reverence. As he passed near the tree line, his hand shot out and closed around my wrist, just as it had on the ridge. He pulled me gently but firmly from the shadows and into his wake, leading me away from the stunned pack back toward the mansion. His touch was warm, his grip sure. He didn't look back at the uproar he'd left behind. When we were clear of the crowd on the dark path, he slowed. He didn't let go of my wrist. He leaned close, his voice a low vibration meant only for me in the thickening dark. "You said I should give them myself," he whispered. "So I am, but I'm not going to the Howling Caves alone." My blood turned to ice. He looked down at me, his eyes gleaming in the starlight, and the unthinkable command was in them before he even spoke. "The full moon rises in 3 nights. What awaits in the Howling Caves? Don't miss the final chapter. Subscribe and comment your theories below." He intended for me to go with him into the Howling Caves. The words echoed in the silence of the stone circle, a silence so profound I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. Gavin's gaze held mine, a silent anchor in the sea of shocked faces. He did not look away, even as the whispers began to swell into a roar of disbelief. I was escorted back to the mansion by a grim-faced Elias. He said nothing, but his disapproval was a physical force, colder than the stone walls of the East Wing. The small room he'd given me felt less like a sanctuary and more like a holding cell. For 3 days, I saw no one but the silent Omega who brought my meals, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. The pack was a hive of agitated noise beyond my window, arguments and speculation buzzing through the air. Peter's voice was often the loudest, a constant, angry drumbeat calling Gavin's sanity and his command concerning me into question. On the 4th morning, Gavin came. He didn't knock, simply opened the door and stood there, filling the frame. He looked different. The raw, weeping grief was gone, burned away and replaced by a frightening intensity. His eyes were clear, focused, but deep within them was the shadow of the caves. "We leave at moonrise," he said, his voice low. "Be ready." Why? The word left me before I could stop it, a breathless, terrified thing. "I have no wolf, I'll be a burden, I'll die in there." "You won't," he said, as if stating a simple fact. "You are the witness. From the beginning, you have been the only one who saw me, not the Alpha's son, not the heir, just me. That truth, it needs to survive, even if I don't." "That's a terrible reason to get me killed," I whispered. A flicker of something like pain crossed his face. "It's not the reason is I can't do it alone, I need your silence." He stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. The space shrank around him. "In the market, you didn't look away. In the hall, you didn't flinch. In the portrait gallery, you listened. At the ridge, you stood your ground. Your strength is a different kind." He reached out, not to grab my wrist this time, but to place something in my palm. It was a small, smooth river stone, dark gray and worn flat by water. One side bore a crude, ancient carving of a single, watchful eye. "My father gave this to me when I was a boy. He said it was found generations ago near the mouth of the caves, a ward of sorts for those who walk without a wolf's skin." He closed my fingers around it. Its surface was warm from his hand. "Keep it close." He left then, as abruptly as he'd come. I stood there, clutching the stone, its warmth seeping into my cold skin. A ward for the Wolfless. The gesture was so profoundly at odds with everything I knew of my place in the world that it left me dizzy. He was either completely mad or he saw something no one else did. My survival and perhaps his depended on which it was. Moonrise found me at the mansion's rear entrance, wearing the sturdiest clothes I owned. Elias stood to the side, his expression unreadable. He handed me a small pack. Food, water, a basic kit. Do not expect to find sustenance in that place. Gavin emerged from the shadows. He carried a larger pack and wore simple, durable gear, no ceremonial garb, no symbols of rank, just a man going into the dark. He nodded at Elias, then looked at me. "Stay directly behind me, do not wander, do not touch the walls unless you must. And no matter what you hear, do not call out, your voice can attract things." We slipped into the forest, leaving the murmuring lights of the village behind. The path to the caves was not a path at all, but a remembered route through increasingly dense and ancient woodland. The air grew colder, the sounds of the pack territory fading until there was only the crunch of our footsteps and the whisper of the wind in the high pines. The full moon rose, a cold silver coin casting sharp black shadows. After hours of walking, the trees began to thin, revealing a sheer cliff face. And there, a jagged, black maw yawned open, twice the height of a man, the entrance to the howling caves. Even from 50 paces away, I felt it. A pressure in the air, a deep, subaudible hum that vibrated in my teeth. It smelled of damp stone, of age, and of something else, something metallic and wild, like ozone after a lightning strike. Gavin stopped, his shoulders tense. "This is the threshold. Once we cross, we are in the domain of the old powers. The rules of the pack do not apply here, only the trial does." He stepped forward. I followed, the carved stone clenched tight in my fist. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the moonlight in an instant. Gavin lit a small, shielded lantern. Its feeble glow revealed a tunnel, the walls smooth and strangely organic, as if worn by something other than water. The hum was louder here, a constant, unsettling presence. We walked. The tunnel descended, twisted, branched. Gavin never hesitated, choosing his way with a quiet certainty that suggested instinct, not knowledge. Time lost meaning. There was only the circle of lantern light, the sound of our breathing, and the oppressive weight of the mountain above us. The air grew thick and cold. Then the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind in unseen crevices. But no, they were voices layered over one another, fragments of speech in languages I didn't know and some in voices I did. I heard Peter's scornful tone, Kiara's dismissive laugh. The collective murmur of the pack in the square, and beneath it all the deep, resonant voice of Gavin's father, not weeping but speaking words too low to grasp. Gavin's steps faltered. He hunched his shoulders as if physically struck by the sound. "Ignore them," he breathed, his voice strained. "They are echoes, memories the caves have eaten. They have no power unless you give it to them." It was easy for him to say. The voices coiled around me, insidious. I heard my mother's voice, a faint memory from early childhood, sighing with disappointment. Wolfless, useless. I pressed the stone harder into my palm, focusing on the bite of its edges. I am here, I am real, this is just stone and shadow. We came to a vast cavern. The lantern light couldn't reach the ceiling. In the center stood a still, black pool. The whispers ceased, replaced by a profound, waiting silence. Gavin approached the water's edge, his reflection shimmering in the lamplight. "The mirror of the self," he said softly, "the first test." He knelt and looked down. I stayed back, but I could see his face in the lantern's glow. It went rigid. A tremor ran through him. He saw something in that dark water, his father's corpse, his own weeping form, the pack turning away. I couldn't know. His breath hitched, a raw, pained sound. The grief was back, threatening to drown him right there on the cavern floor. My feet moved before my mind could command them. I walked to the pool's edge, not looking into the water, and knelt beside him. I didn't touch him, I didn't speak. I simply knelt there, a solid, silent presence in the echoing dark. I held the carved stone out, letting its shape be seen in the dim light. He tore his gaze from the water and looked at me, his eyes wide and lost. He looked from my face to the stone, and something in his clenched. He drew a shuddering breath, then another, deeper one. The tremor subsided. He gave a single, sharp nod and pushed himself to his feet. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. We moved on. The caves began to change. The smooth tunnels gave way to passages studded with crystals that glowed with a faint, internal light. The air grew warmer, carrying a scent like hot stone and wild herbs. The second test found us in a chamber where the path split into 7 identical openings. A low, rhythmic growl emanated from each, the sound of a massive predator. "The path of the heart," Gavin said, his voice tight. "Only one leads forward, the others circle back to the entrance or simply end. Choose wrong and the trial is over." He closed his eyes, scenting the air, listening. His brow furrowed in frustration. "I can't, they all smell of threat, of challenge, that's not the key." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. I had no wolf sense to guide me. I had only the silence he'd asked for and my own human senses. I listened past the growls. In the 6th tunnel, just beneath the predatory rumble, I heard it, a faint, almost musical trickle of water. "Life, not just threat," I pointed, "that one." He didn't question. He strode toward the 6th opening. The growl intensified as we entered, becoming a physical vibration in the air, but it did not materialize into a beast. The tunnel led us to a narrow bridge over a deep chasm from which the sound of flowing water echoed far below. Beyond the bridge, the final chamber awaited. It was smaller than the others, dome-shaped, and in its center, on a natural pedestal of stone, rested a massive, ancient wolf skull. It was not a trophy. It was an altar. The air here was charged, humming with the power I'd felt at the entrance, but focused, potent. This was the heart of it. Gavin approached the skull and knelt. I am Gavin, son of Alistair of the line that stretches back to the first howl. I come before the ancestral bone to claim my right or to forfeit my life. The hum deepened, the crystals in the walls brightened, and then the skull moved. Not physically, but a shimmering, spectral form began to coalesce above it, the ghostly image of a colossal wolf, its eyes pits of cold, blue light. A voice spoke not in the air but directly into my mind, a crushing weight of age and judgment. You carry the scent of grief. It clouds you, and Alpha cannot lead from the floor. Gavin flinched but held his ground. I grieve because I loved. Is a leader without love worth following? Love is weakness. It left you broken before your pack. It was the breaking that let the light in, Gavin said, his voice growing stronger. It showed me who stood with me in the pieces. His head turned just slightly toward where I stood in the shadows by the entrance. Strength isn't the absence of feeling, it's feeling it all and choosing to stand anyway. My father taught me to rule my grief, it taught me why. The spectral wolf regarded him, the silence stretched, agonizing. And you bring a shadow to this place, a silent one, Wolfless, why? She is my witness, Gavin said, unwavering. The pack sees only the wolf, she sees the man, a leader must be both. If I am to lead them, I must remember who I am when the fur is gone. She is that reminder. Her strength is her silence, her sight. I claim it as my own. The blue eyes shifted from him to me. The pressure of that gaze was unbearable, a weight that sought to flatten me into the stone. I wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but I remembered the market square, the portrait gallery, the ridge. I remembered the warm stone in my hand. I stood still. I met the gaze of the ancient ghost. I did not look away. The spectral wolf looked back to Gavin. The trial is not for the Alpha alone, it is for the pack he will become. The Wolfless Omega has stood where the pack would not. She has walked the paths of echoes and choice. Her presence is accepted. The ghostly form began to fade. The blue light dimmed, then gathered itself, shooting from the skull's empty sockets in two thin beams. They struck Gavin in the chest. He arched back, a gasp tearing from his throat. Light erupted from him, not the silver of the moon, but a deep, vibrant gold. It filled the chamber, warm and immense, and for a fleeting second I saw the outline of a wolf within it. Larger and more majestic than any I could imagine, with eyes that held both fierce intelligence and profound sorrow. Then the light snapped back into him. He slumped forward, catching himself on his hands, breathing heavily. The humming ceased. The chamber was just a cave again, the skull was just bone. Slowly he stood. He turned to me. He was the same Gavin and yet utterly transformed. The grief was not gone, but integrated, a part of his foundation now. His eyes held a calm, terrifying authority, but also the clarity he'd spoken of. He was whole. It is done, he said. His voice echoed with a new, subtle resonance. The journey back felt shorter. The caves offered no more challenges, the whispers were silent. We emerged into the pre-dawn gray, the moon setting on the opposite horizon. The air of the forest was shockingly sweet, alive with ordinary sounds. We returned to a pack on the brink. A crowd had gathered in the square before the mansion, drawn by some sense of the culmination. Peter stood at the front, arms crossed, Kiara beside him. They watched us approach, their expressions shifting from anticipation to disbelief, then to dawning, uneasy realization. We were alive, we were unharmed. Gavin did not stop at the foot of the mansion steps. He walked into the center of the square, pulling the attention of every wolf with his silent, deliberate presence. I followed, stopping a few paces behind him as I had in the caves. He looked at Peter. The trial is complete. I have entered the howling caves and I have returned. Peter's jaw worked. that proves nothing but survival. It proves everything, Gavin said, his voice carrying effortlessly. The ancestral power has judged me worthy, but more than that, I judge myself worthy. He turned his gaze to the pack, to the faces of those who had doubted, who had whispered. I am your alpha not by birth alone, but by right earned in the dark. A shockwave of silence, then murmuring. He continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. Strength has many forms. We have revered the claw and the fang, and we have forgotten the strength of the steady hand, the watching eye, the silent heart that does not flee. Maria, a wolfless omega, walked into the heart of our oldest terror and stood witness for this pack. She faced the ancestral spirit where many of you would have faltered. From this day, she holds a place of honor. Her voice, when she chooses to use it, will be heard. He finally looked back at Peter. Peter, you are strong, you are capable, your service to the pack guard is noted. You will retain your position and your counsel will be heard, but your challenge is ended. Swear your loyalty now or leave this territory by sundown. The square held its breath. Peter's face was a mask of conflict, pride warring with the undeniable new power radiating from Gavin. He looked at Kiara, whose earlier disdain had melted into uncertainty. He looked at the guards behind him, who were now looking at Gavin with a wary, newfound respect. The power had shifted irrevocably. With a grinding effort, Peter lowered himself to one knee. My alpha, he said, the words ripped from him. One by one, the pack followed, a ripple of submission spreading through the square. Gavin stood tall, accepting it. Then he turned and walked toward the mansion steps. He paused beside me. Come, he said, not as a command to a servant, but as an invitation to a companion. There is much to do. I looked at the kneeling pack, at the rising sun painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. I felt the carved stone smooth in my pocket. I was not invisible. I was not just a witness anymore. I was something new for a pack that was becoming something new. I took a step, then another, following my alpha out of the shadows and into the dawn. Thank you for walking this path with Maria and Gavin. If their story moved you, please share it with another. Your readership means the world.